Hola, historians! Welcome to China Part 8, the Ocho, as they call it. As you would know if you had watched the movie Dodgeball, the Ocho, a good, bad movie. You know, it's bad, but it's good. Like, it's so bad it's good. Dodgeball. There you go. Vince Vaughn's in it, amongst, I don't know, probably other people, but I know no names of any Hollywood people, because that's my wife's responsibility is to know those things. Okay, today we're talking about people, problems, and challenges for modern China. All right, so we're talking demographics and demographic problems, some economics and politics, and some human rights. When you see me looking down into the corner, beep, 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 like I'm doing right now, just looking at my notes. All right, I'm not just like sitting there looking at my cuticles, although I do practice good hand care. All right, so now we're going to transition a lot of what we're talking about here in the unit to more modern things that are going on in China. So before we start to look at more of China's modern history, significance, and influence on history, we need to understand some of the basics about what's going on in China. So when we're talking demographics, we're talking about things going on with their population. All right, so we're talking population numbers amongst other things, and then like the way that their population breaks down. So when we look at China, they are the largest country in the world. I'm going to try to use a little pen here and do some writing. We'll see if I can get this in here. All right, their population is 1,437,934,556. Wow, that looks terrible. Look at that. All right. So here's an easy way to think about their population. It's 1.4 billion. All right, that makes it the largest country in the world. Boop. There we go. Now I'm back. All right, so that makes it the largest country in the world. They have an enormous population. That's good, like if you ever need to go fight a war where a lot of people are going to die, or you want to just have a really big army, but it's actually a pretty big problem too, because like how do you feed and clothe and house all those people? 1.4 billion. 1,437,934,556 people. Wow. All right. In comparison, there's about 335 million people in the United States. So China has 1.1 billion more people than the population of the United States. So their population is massive. All right. Now, a couple other things going on with their people, some general stuff. When we're talking about religions, there are four main religions in China. All right, some of them we've seen before, some of them you could probably guess. In general, China is not an incredibly religious country. There's been a little bit of a religious resurgence in China recently, which we'll probably talk about more a little bit later in the unit. But in general, communist China doesn't want religion. Remember, that's something that we've learned about with the communist takeover, because they want you loyal to the state, not to your religion, not to your God. And actually, the emperors and the dynasties saw this a little bit too, where they really thought that if people were loyal to their religion, then they would not be loyal to the emperor or to the state or to Mao or to Deng Xiaoping or whoever's in charge. Now, recently, China has passed some laws that says that they have more religious freedom, but there's actually a lot of repression of religions, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the four main religions in China. Oh, come here, bud. Come here. Good. Here, then say it.
Hi.
Say hi, girls.
Hi, Lord.
How are you today?
How are you?
Quick Joey cameo there. Now he's running back to watch more Paw Patrol. Four main religions in China: Taoism, which we've talked about, Buddhism, which we haven't talked about very much, but Buddhism got its start in China during the dynastic era. And then Christianity and Islam. Those are the four main religions. And it depends on what numbers you look at. People aren't very open about reporting what religions they practice, again, because there's some religious repression and persecution in China. Like I found one poll from 2016, a Gallup poll, where 90% of the population said they were atheist or a-religious, like they just didn't practice religion. That's probably not very accurate, though, because people are hesitant to tell you the truth. So they've got a big population, four major religions. Their main language is Mandarin Chinese. All right, that's really their standard Chinese is Mandarin Chinese. Learn how to speak Mandarin Chinese, and you're going to always have a job. All right, it's absolutely high in demand, but it's very difficult to learn. About 90 to 95% of their population speaks Mandarin Chinese. There's a couple different like dialects and different versions of Chinese Mandarin's the main one. Cantonese is another one. There's about 3% of the population that speaks Cantonese. So about 95% is Mandarin, 3% is Cantonese. And then there's like 10 to 13 other dialects that make up the last 2% of the population, but all of them really based on the standard Mandarin Chinese. So all of them are very, very similar. When it comes to education, their literacy rate is 96%. So your literacy rate is how much of your population can read and write at a 6th grade level. All right, so for people aged 15 and up, the literacy rate is 96%. It's 98% for males, 94% for females. So again, education is not free in China. Everyone has to pay for it. And because China does have some history of men being more important than women, if a family can only afford to educate one or a few of their children, the boys typically get it over the girls. So that's why we see that big gap. 98% literacy rate for men, 94% for females for an overall literacy rate of 96%. And obviously it's probably lower than that, because that's really only pulling a lot of the urbanized areas. Remember, urban is like city livers, people who live in the city. The rural population probably has a much lower literacy rate, but the population is so big, 1.4 billion, they can't test everybody. They can't really know that for sure. The United States claims to have a 100% literacy rate. It's probably like 99.9. All right, of most of our population can read and write at a 6th grade level. So your literacy rate is a good baseline, but it's not really saying that you're that educated. Last piece of demographic info, life expectancy. All right, so China gets a lot of credit for having like a very healthy diet, and overall they do, but they don't have good healthcare. Their healthcare system is very poor. In the rural areas of China, they spend something like less than $1 a year per person on healthcare. All right, which is almost impossible. That just means there's no money there, right? There's no healthcare access. So their diet is good, their overall lifestyle is good, their healthcare system is poor. So they have an average life expectancy of about 76 years, a little over 76 years. In the United States, it's slightly under 79 years. We have like a good, not great healthcare system and a terrible diet and lifestyle, but our diet and lifestyle problems are made up for by our good healthcare system. The highest life expectancy in the world, in case you're wondering, so again, China is like 76 years, the United States is about 79 years. The highest in the world is 84 and a half years old. Hong Kong and Japan, they have the longest life expectancy. Healthy population, good lifestyle, good diet, good healthcare, right? Those are the things that make up your life expectancy. So all of these demographic, pieces of information are important to understand modern China. They also show us that there's going to be some problems going on because of this. All right, that massive population, 1.4 billion, that's a major problem. It makes huge economic difficulties for China to try to overcome. It creates huge economic challenges. Think about trying to create a job for 1.4 billion people. That's difficult. Trying to regulate a currency for 1.4 billion people, that's very difficult. Trying to have enough food to feed 1.4 billion people, that's really difficult. So their large population puts a lot of strains on their economy and their food production. They also have major problems with their healthcare industry, because how do you provide adequate healthcare for that large of a population, and in a very large country too that's geographically very spread out? So that large population is difficult. Same thing for education. How are you really going to provide a good education for that large of a population? And education is not free. It's difficult to have socio-economic advancement without good education. And again, in rural areas, the educational rates are very low. So all of these problems are accentuated by the high population. It's hard to provide food, jobs, education, healthcare, basic services when you have that large of a population. Now, China's population is actually slowing down. When we look at this chart, this is a demographic chart of population. Okay, so we can see and it's a little outdated, 2015. I couldn't find a more modern one. I apologize. But you can see female population, male population here, going up by age group, and you can see the age group is about 5 years. Right? Now what we're really seeing here is that China is aging. China's old. All right? This is a problem for China. All right? So when you look at the young part of their population here, hold on, see if I can do this. Try and draw again. All right? So when we look at the younger part of their population, oh no, pause, hold on. Okay, let's try this again. It zoomed. When we look at the younger part of their population, it's small. right? It's this one of the smaller percentages of their population. What you want to see on these charts is more of like a healthy pyramid. If you have a healthy pyramid, that means that you have the young, transition into the old. That's what you're going to see more often. Or you want to see a little bit more gradual. Hold on, let me erase here. Or you want to see it be a little more gradual, where it's kind of like this, where you don't have that big gap up at the top there. All right. So when you look at their demographic chart, what it's showing is that all these are going to continue to slide up, right? So eventually you're going to have this really old population, and then you're going to have a much smaller, younger population. The US is going through the same thing right now. That's a problem because you can't expect these younger people to be able to care for all of these older people. So China actually has an aging population. One thing that's pretty well known throughout history and society today is China's one-child policy. So for a while, China's population was growing so fast that in the 1980s, they instituted the one-child policy, where they tried to limit their population growth because they knew that it was causing all of these problems for them. They can't provide the healthcare, the education, the food, the jobs, etc. So in the 1980s, China tried to limit the number of children people could have. Urban families could have one child, rural families could have two, and if you violated that, you could face penalties, fines, and increased taxes. Well, eventually they started to move away from that. It worked okay in the cities. It didn't work very well in the countryside because it's very hard to actually institute that type of policy and that type of program, again, over such a large geographic population and such just a large number of population. So eventually they ended it. It officially ended in October 2015 because China's population is shrinking, right? And their labor pool is shrinking. And if the labor pool decreases too much, then you have to pay workers more. Your economy won't grow as quickly. So the one-child policy is a good specific example of how their demographics have impacted government decisions and caused problems. All right, you can't provide services to this giant population. So what do? You try to shrink the population down with the one-child policy. If you're an urban family, you can have one child. If you're a rural family, you can have two child. If you have more than that, fees, taxes coming your way, in the form of penalties. Well, that's a hard policy to administer. And then eventually it backfires. It leads to a shrinking population where you're not going to have enough people to care for the older portion of your population. Something that, again, the United States is going through a little bit right now. So there's problems to go along with this giant population that China has. There's religious problems as well, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So economics are the next thing that we'll talk about, but we'll do that in the next video. So pause this bad boy or close it out, head over to the next video, and then we'll talk about some economic, political, and human rights problems that present themselves due to China's demographics. Good job so far. Keep it up.